Welcome back to Firmer Ground from SRM, where we explore trends and strategies impacting the current and future state of financial institutions in North America and across the globe. My name is Neil Doherty, host of today's podcast and Managing Director of Global Marketing at SRM. Every episode features perspectives from the world of banking and financial services, including thought leaders here at SRM, executives at future-thinking financial institutions, and other experts from all corners of the industry. In this episode, I speak with Simon Rose of SRM Europe. Simon is our consulting director based in Durham, England. He works directly with our bank and credit union clients on some of the most important work we deliver, including organizational design and strategy engagements. Before joining SRM, Simon spent time as a consultant at Grant Thornton UK and Bearing Point, as well as 14 years internally at a UK national bank. He brings a unique understanding of the global financial services space and specifically its operational challenges and opportunities, a topic we'll dive into in this episode. We hope you enjoy the conversation, and please let us know what topics you'd like to hear about in upcoming podcasts. Well, hi everyone, Neil Doherty here, Managing Director of Global Marketing at SRM, and my guest today in the studio is Simon Rose. And Simon is our Consulting Director at SRM Europe, and while Simon is based in the UK, he works very closely with our clients here in North America and brings a global perspective to the strategy engagements he collaborates on. So really psyched to have him here today. He's going to provide some perspectives for us on the typical challenges that FIs face when looking to mature, scale, diversify their business models. So welcome, Simon. How are you today?
Hey Neil, very good, thanks, and great to be with you today, and thanks for the opportunity to provide a perspective on the industry for you.
Absolutely. I know it's been a long time coming where we were going to get some perspective from our colleagues here in SRM Europe, so I'm really excited about that. And what do you say we just kind of get into it today? I know I have a couple of questions I was hoping to get your take on. So does that sound good?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
All right, excellent. Well, our first question that I was thinking about today, just kind of, given what we've talked about in the past and some of the challenges that we're seeing in the regional banking space here in the US this year and the lots of consolidation continuing to be a strong trend, I'm just curious, what do you see as the characteristics needed for a bank or credit union to truly survive and thrive in an environment like we're dealing with today?
Well, that's a great question. There's lots going on, particularly with the inflation challenges and cost of living and all of that. But for me, I see this fundamentally about the target market, principally, Neil. Many of our clients have an aging customer base, and I think that's brought more to the fore with credit unions specifically, certainly what I'm seeing with the work that I'm doing with our stateside clients. And
Hmm.
there's a dearth of younger demographics, which actually, if credit unions and some of the community banks aren't careful, that could prove to be quite existential for some. While there are strategic goals in place, they don't often translate well to effective marketing strategies or action even to try and rebalance the portfolio, particularly regarding deposits. And in my experience, some product ranges have not been reviewed for quite some time. And rarely do they actually focus on what I would say are the seven stages of life. So, the whole great cradle to grave approach to bringing members and customers on that whole journey. But for me, key to all of that is setting the right strategic vision at the very top of the organization and ensuring that all departments have their own what I refer to as a subordinated strategy to ensure that everyone from marketing to product design teams to technology to HR all align on a strong roadmap with performance measures assigned to help achieve the wider goals for the organization.
Okay, well, that's a pretty comprehensive answer there. I know you started with the idea of demographics, you got into product a little bit, and then it ultimately, rolls into strategy, which I know is your passion when it comes
Yeah.
to working with banks, working with credit unions. And so I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, and you'll forgive me for this, but when you think about the clients you're working with and you're helping them evaluate their capabilities and thinking about their kind of maturity arc and adding new lines of business, what are some of the challenges that they face in terms of looking to scale, right? So let's assume that some of those institutions are getting some of those things that you mentioned right, and they're looking to then build upon that. What are those challenges that banks and credit unions are facing when they're looking to scale their own capability?
Oh, you're on a roll here with these questions, Neil. Another good one. But for me, this is fourfold. So the first one really is direction setting. having a strong vision with strong decision-making capabilities and leadership behind that to be able to take the organization and to some extent their customer base on that journey with them. You then need to be thinking about the whole forward planning agenda, what the organizational path looks like, and is it in tune with the propensity for the industry changing? And things like AI coming on board. You've got centrally backed digital currencies and all of that. Are they planning that in the right direction, and also looking at the customer's willingness to be able to move with that said change in terms of how it will evolve, from sort of designing that whole sort of product and service proposition. You then got things like workforce planning, which is really interesting, particularly in the market that we have now for hiring. Our organizations actually looking in the right places to be able to properly align the resources to the needs of member and customer demands. That's not something that we're seeing. It's rather lacking across many organizations, particularly from a maturity perspective. And not being able to stretch those skills with new solutions, automation, without the need to be able to rush to recruit staff. That's essential, I think. Then you come on to things like mapping the customer journey. So do you actually understand how customers wish to engage with the organization? At what points, at what channels, how will that change? And that is essential really for helping to really set the tone, the agenda for how you market your products, but also how you enable the products through provision of technology around those channels. And that leads to organizations who don't sort of plan in that way to enforcing their own processes, their own desires of how they want to engage on the customer, rather than building processes around the customer. So that's kind of what I see there in helping to really scale those capabilities across those four areas.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And it's a good segue into the idea of, let's say that, an institution gets that right. They start to move in a strong direction there. They're evaluating all those four items that you really spoke to. Then the next thing is kind of going back to, how do they take those learnings and that maturity and then offer better products and services to their customers or their members, right? So one of the questions I was curious about, and I know just based on your exposure to clients, you probably have a good perspective on this, but what other trends are you seeing when it comes to financial services product development, design, that are out there in the market? Where do you think kind of the the next frontier is in terms of the product development piece?
Yeah, it's slightly different over this side of the pond to what it is in stateside. But
Sure.
if I think specifically on the US, there's a lot of discussion, and we know this because we do a lot of this at SRM, pushing things around our clients around crypto, DeFi, the centrally backed digital currencies, and so on, and digital assets. And that to me is really exciting. It's a really exciting agenda, particularly to move things forward, like payments and real time payments, essentially, which is something that's been lacking for a number of years in the US. And I'm glad that we are operating at the forefront of that for our clients. But it feels like at times that it's a bit like shiny object syndrome, if you get my meaning.
Sure.
But genuinely, these provide some major opportunities to support customers and businesses in new ways, but given the shiny object syndrome, it's really limited around true strategizing on whether they're actually useful to meet the customers' who known and unknown demands for the future. Will they be enabling the achievement of their targets? How does that warrant a shift in technology infrastructure? It kind of connects back to the earlier points that I was making around knowing a customer, knowing how the customer wants to engage. And it's not right for every business to be pursuing these exciting new things that really could be changing along the landscape, because you need to have a good sense of the values of the business. And getting that strategy right with a clear implementation roadmap could, see awesome developments really that help to drive improvements in things like real-time gross settlements, international payments, security, uh, data specifically, and customer engagement, and also link with the emerging open banking agenda that's taking off right now in North America. So that's something that's really been an interesting driver for competitiveness in the UK, and that started to spread around the APAC and particularly in Canada, rather than the US specifically. But getting into all of that agenda, but making sure that it's the right fit for the type of customers that you want, that target market, knowing who you're wanting to engage with.
The next question I wanted to ask you then, Simon, is, you talked a lot about, some of the challenges, some of the trends that are out there in terms of product development, a little bit of that shiny object syndrome, which we see that here a lot. I think AI is probably a great example of that at times in terms of, having it as part of the remit, but not necessarily knowing how you'll best use it to benefit, both internal and external operations. But what else might limit financial institutions from joining the fray on some of the larger trends that are out there today?
Yeah, several things to consider here from my perspective, and this really comes down to mainly executive ambition. Um, so, do they have the right ambition? Is it cogent with how they want to take the business forward, and really is it grounded in some tangible targets that can move the business forward in the right way, the right pace? But asides to that, you also have things like funding to invest. So are they actually putting enough in their annual budget cycles away to be able to explore some of the new things that are coming to pass? So one of the things that we're used to in the type of work that we do is what we call fast fail. So investing in a type of solution that will ultimately allow the business to accelerate some interesting perspectives on how they might use a particular solution and how that might apply to the business in the future. And if it doesn't work, then they can kill it straight away without sort of investing further in it. Does it fit with the business? Does it ultimately fit with the plan, the strategy that they have, and how the business might evolve over the coming years? What is the comfort around the regulatory position on these areas? And importantly, do they actually know their customers enough to understand if the return on investment is viable?
Yeah, I mean, those are all fantastic points, and some of the items that I would expect that you would have mentioned. You started to mention the idea of regulatory. So, how do you think regulation and compliance trends are going to factor into the ability for FIs to enhance offerings? And again, that could be from a technology standpoint, that could be from just kind of a general experience standpoint, but certainly, we know that that's an ongoing conversation here. You had mentioned digital assets earlier, and obviously the need for regulation there has been brought up time and time again. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, and again, the conversations that you're having with leaders in banking and credit union, you know, what type of regulation and compliance challenges do you think ultimately, may either enhance or hamper the ability for these FIs to continue to build their offerings?
Yeah, I think I could probably easily talk quite a lot on this subject, Neil, but I'll try and keep it brief. But so this has been easily the biggest growth area in financial services, regardless of where you are located geographically across the last couple of decades. It's typically reactive in nature. Rarely do we actually see regulators collaborating with the industry to be able to bring innovation to market. Therefore, the compliance teams really have to take their own view on regulations, make interpretations. And given that is typically reactive, they often tend to spend time revisiting what's gone before to either retrofit what they've done to compliance or to rectify issues, potentially in some cases due to overinterpretation of the rules. And that's particularly what we see in the type of work that I'm involved in, is taking it to the nth degree when actually you don't necessarily need to do that. And that in itself can actually be detrimental to customers. In my experience, however, where financial institutions do take the time to map monitor, amend, and improve their customer journeys with a resulting action to improve the processes that support the customer journeys being facilitated through in the best possible way, and then the technology around those to be able to enable them effectively, then compliance ultimately takes care of itself. I often have a saying that I express to my clients, which is sell compliantly, not compliantly sell. And thereby, if you ensure that the customer is genuinely and also provably at the heart of all your products and services and processes that support these, then that will go a long way with the regulators being able to look on approvingly at what you're doing and improving compliance outcomes across the board.
That's interesting. I like the subtlety of that phrase and that adage, but absolutely hear what you're saying there. In fact, our newer colleague Josh Herman, we spoke to him recently, and he was talking about the fact that he had a history as a regulator, right, and he also has a history as an innovator, and he believes that they can go hand in hand as long as the approach is sound and you're thinking a few steps ahead, right? So
That's it.
it sounds to me like that's the path that the best versions of institutions take, and that some are a little bit more reactive, but it's definitely something that we continue to hear about in terms of how to make the most of strategy when you're not sure about kind of what comes next from a regulatory standpoint. So it appears to me that those types of conversations are happening fairly often with our clients. Is that fair to say, just in terms of your work?
It is, yeah, and it's one thing that we often advocate with our clients is really just take that instead of it being a myopic view, actually get out there, talk to your customers, your prospects. Often people rely so much on net promoter score, but that's not really sort of getting to that's really just an immediate outcome process. What we want to be able to see is how customers view the effort to engage, and if clients are out there talking to their customers and trying to understand, in great detail, does what they provide by way of services and how they facilitate that work, um, uh, give them a good experience of the business, then that certainly helps. And all of that can be evidence building to be able to demonstrate to the regulatory bodies that you have the customer at the heart of everything that you do. Um, so compliance and regulation is ultimately about ensuring good outcomes for the customer. And if you can demonstrate how you, through that design of process and customer journey, then you got a long way along the road to the positive outcomes that the regulator wants to see and a good bill of health.
Right. No, that makes sense, and I appreciate you sharing that additional insight there. All right, I want to ask this question because we talk about this a lot just in our one-to-one conversations, and I think it's such a unique point of view that SRM can bring to the table, which is the fact that we have yourself and other colleagues stationed in the UK and Europe, and I'm just curious, thinking about kind of the international banking community. Can you talk to us a little bit about how maybe the international banks, maybe so UK, Europe, have overcome similar challenges that banks in the US, banks and credit unions are facing here when it comes to growth or scale? Anything that you think is important to kind of point out and just share as a kind of a perspective builder, right? In terms of, the fact that maybe sometimes here in North America, our challenges, there's a little bit of a lag, and these are some of the things that international banking has already effectively, been challenged with, taken on directly and overcome.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll stick a little bit with the regulatory theme here, Neil.
Sure.
But in large part, a lot of the growth and the scaling, the maturing has not been without sort of any pain. When you look in particularly this side of the pond, but also in the APAC regions as well, the maturity of financial services
Hmm.
is generally greater than it is in North America, and probably I would say you guys are 15 to 20 years behind us. So, if I might be so bold to say that in terms of the maturity level of what you provide, and arguably, while the regulatory environment is actually intended to protect the consumer across all of these geographies, the unintended consequences of that have been to stifle the very innovation and customer support that's needed. However, what we've been seeing, certainly in the more mature jurisdictions such as the UK and Australasia, what you're actually seeing now is a notable shift by the regulators. So we talked a little bit about regulation generally being reactive in nature. We're starting to see that shift now to become more in tune with what might need to happen for innovation, and how regulators can support and collaborate on the innovation agenda, particularly where it serves to support competition, which is largely some of the drivers that we see in Europe, trying to increase that competitive environment. And that comes into the innovative agenda around things like open banking and artificial intelligence being used within financial services. And to some extent, that's largely been driven by the industry as a means to ensure that while their support is provided to consumers, that they wanted to take a reframe of that approach to ensure that anything that they design for the future solutions-wise is secure. And what's been the turning point in the UK particularly was the introduction of what we call a sandbox and innovation hub by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. So that's demonstrated to me personally that regulators are now prepared to get into the trenches with the industry to help the journey of development so that everybody has an easing of the pain. So you can have a level of collaboration that really serves to promote the right things for customers, but you don't spend an awful lot of money trying to invest in something that ultimately gets taken apart by the regulator in future. So that's something that's really turned the corner over here, and it's been really positive to see, and hopefully that will come through stateside too, which interestingly is another trend that I see, is whatever tends to happen this side of the pond, within a matter of space of 12, 18 months or so, you start to see that regulatory shift happen in the US.
Right. Well, hopefully that is the case, and maybe potentially sooner, right? In terms of some of these critical items and critical learnings. Last question I have for you, Simon, and I know this is kind of near and dear to just what you do on a daily basis, which is the idea of organizational design. And it's sort of this question goes back to sort of where we started today with a couple of the questions that I asked and some thoughts that you had shared. But are there any specific trends in organizational design in the financial services space that you're seeing that you think could be difference makers, that are allowing organizations to move faster to meet, customer/member demand better? Anything out there from an organizational design standpoint that is kind of really interesting right now and worth exploring, both for what you do day to day, as well as obviously for the organizations that SRM serves?
Yeah, and that's interesting. When you talk about organization design, the first thing that often comes to mind with people, well, okay, we're going to lose jobs out of this. And, maybe in the current economic cycle that we're in, many organizations are trying to seek to reduce their cost base, which, invariably sort of means making people redundant. But often this comes from a noble view of increasing resource and headcount when the business is strong. Yet really what comes into play here is the businesses are not really looking at scalability of operations. They tend to get overlooked. So, and we've all heard the race to automate and bring artificial intelligence to the table in many organizations, which is only going to become more important. But I think caution needs to be applied here. And firstly, you never really want to automate a bad process, and we often try to get that
Right.
message across as loud as possible to clients. But not all processes are actually ripe for automation either, and that'll differ between organizations. So it's important, certainly from my perspective, to focus on the direction of the business first, which we talked about a little bit in the earlier points. But it comes to the interest of some of those trends coming to the fore, there's been a lot of push really to make things like buy now, pay later proposition um, sort of land particularly in this kind of economic cycle as a helpful tool for consumers, but it has a huge potential to be detrimental to the customer long term. And for me, key trends that should be looked at in areas such as banking as a service, infrastructure, for example, embedded finance, open banking, making open banking more effective. And one of the trends that I think would be really, really interesting for open banking, which will ultimately take off in a few years' time, is whoever jumps on this piece, has the potential to really gain competitive advantage, in my view. Which, if they capitalize on what open banking allows them to do, it could really drive a game-changing component to the way that whole financial services propositions are offered. Um, and that means looking at how data exposure is coming into play. There's a real issue at this moment in time for adopting open banking in the UK because people don't really want to be on the hook for the responsibility around giving their data. But if we can get through that, then the opportunity to have financial institutions, for example, who operate checking accounts, to genuinely show interest in reducing customer outgoings because they know what's coming in, they know what's going out in terms of regular payments. So are they able to provide a good level of analysis on the bills that consumers are having to pay? Things like mobile phone bills, utilities, and then partner with existing businesses out there that maybe have a similar sort of value set to be able to generally offer more effective, cost-effective bills for their customers through the use of data, harnessing that data to really drive some exciting propositions. But that all really takes some level of investment. It takes focus on how they can harness the best parts of regulation to really drive a level of innovation.
That's an interesting one too. So you're effectively saying that that data would allow customers, consumers to better benchmark what they're paying versus the average, and ideally help them kind of gain a better cost on what they're buying, what they're consuming.
Yeah.
Which
So I guess to more effectively summarize that, to be a bit more articulate, is instead of the consumer having to go to all of these aggregator sites, to be able to find the best deals on mobile phone bills or their utilities or whatever that might be,
sure.
why can't the financial institution do that for them?
Right, and then that's a additional value prop to stay with that financial institution, right? Just the
Yeah.
same as you start to see, here in the States around the FICO score options that have become free and more prevalent and more automated. You would think that that would be really a value add in terms of the overall relationship. So I love what you're talking about there. And of course, the other side of that, as you mentioned, is managing data privacy and understanding how to do that safely and securely, which is something that most countries beyond North America here are well ahead of us. And I know some of that is just around how we've seen our need to reach out to customers and target and things of that nature. But I know that over time that will probably be changing as well. So definitely an interesting point there in terms of how open banking can ultimately be, really something that the consumer wins by having in place. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's genuinely, Neil. I guess about reputationally, particularly since the 2007 crash and everything, banks and credit unions will have had some kind of dent into their reputation. But if they can genuinely reframe services about doing the right thing for customers, then
Mhm.
that's an opportunity to really improve in the eyes of, firstly, customers, and secondly, the regulator.
Mhm. And when you're in conversations today with our customers, are you getting a feel that there's um, a willingness to embrace things like open banking and a want to explore that?
It's not really a discussion that I've actually heard. It's more that I've actually seen it being discussed in forums and
Sure.
white papers, but it's not something that's really come to the fore in direct one-to-one discussions with executives,
Hmm.
even to the point where things like FedNow is, the UK's had faster payments since 2007. You guys have been quite some time behind that, but there's still a lag because I think the technology, the appetite to really plug into some of those capabilities and emerging innovative solutions is not quite there yet. And I think there are some other aspects that are probably driving that down the agenda, which is things like the regulatory position on your. Sorry, it escapes me now in terms of the recent one that's come out that a lot of our clients have been battling with, but it's there is a large focus around regulation on data
Sure.
within credit unions particularly, and also trying to get their legacy platforms improved. So
Hmm.
so that sort of thing is an ideal state, I guess. It's an ambition,
Right.
but it's not something that's regularly focused on in the conversations that we have with our clients.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Simon. I really enjoyed talking through a number of these topics. I think you provided a lot of food for thought for our listeners. Certainly, always good to have that international perspective, with us here at SRM. And obviously, I'd encourage anyone who's interested about the topics we've discussed today to connect with Simon on LinkedIn. Simon, I know you're very active on LinkedIn as well, and are always posting good content and both the small and big wins that the team at SRM has accomplished. So I'm sure we'll have you back on here on the podcast in the near future for some other things that are happening out there. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, it's been great. Some great questions there. I hope that's of interest to the audience, and thank you for allowing me to indulge, providing my opinions in some of the questions, Neil. And as I say, I hope it's genuinely informative for the
Absolutely,
audience.
absolutely was.
Yeah.
So thank you, Simon, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to Firmer Ground from SRM. Please stay tuned for our upcoming podcast, and until then, you can visit us at srmcorp.com or on LinkedIn and Twitter. Be sure to follow our SRM Europe team on LinkedIn as well, so you can keep track of the global perspectives that matter.